It is Cara Santamaria.
Good morning, QED. Good morning. I cannot believe they put me on first today with no parallel sessions going on. This really is trial by fire here. I'm so excited to be at my first ever QED. I'm also doing something that I've kind of never done before today, which is a talk with slides. So usually I just wing it, bear with me, this should get interesting. I want to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I think that many of you in the audience maybe know me by my voice as the newest rogue on the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. But back across the pond, I work as a television presenter. I stole that phrase from you guys because it sounds way more important than host, which is what we call it in America. A journalist, a podcaster, both on Talk Nerdy and Skeptics Guide. I consider myself a skeptic. It is one of those hats when you try to kind of give yourself a list of ways that you identify. An atheist. Actually, the atheism came first, prior to the skepticism for me. It came before the science. And I think we'll get to that a little bit down the line. But most of all, I consider myself a science communicator. It's kind of the umbrella term that I use when people say, what is it that you do for a living? The problem is most people don't know what a science communicator is, so then there's a lot more explanation that has to come from that. And part of my talk today will be about what it means to be a science communicator and kind of some tips that I've learned throughout my years doing this about how to be more effective in science communication, if any of you in the audience are interested in doing that. How many of you out there would consider to some extent to be a science communicator? Okay, yeah, I think it's a fair amount. How many in the audience are atheists? Yeah, that's what I figured. Skeptics? Yeah? And how many of you work in media? A few. Okay, so some of what I want to do today is give you a little bit of behind the scenes about the way that the media functions, especially in the United States. I know it's a little bit different than it is here in England. All right, so just as a little bit of background, what it is that I do currently, I work on a local television show in Los Angeles called SoCal Connected. It's a news and public affairs show that mostly takes place in the field. It used to be on our PBS affiliate, so it was public television. We've since left that affiliation, but went out on our own on a network called KCET, which means we don't have commercials, we're fully funded by the public, so we have no money. And it's really hard to do journalism with no money. I also work on a kids show on Saturday morning on Fox, not Fox News, don't get them confused, called Fab Lab, and it's really exciting. Its intention is to get young women, kind of tweens, 9 to 13-year-old girls excited about science, and it's a ton of fun. And then lastly, one of my most recent gigs was as the web host for all of the America's Greatest Makers series, which is a television show on TBS with a web component, a reality competition series by Mark Burnett Productions, where individuals within the maker movement, you guys familiar with the maker movement? So tinkerers, people who go to maker spaces, who are interested in coding, who are interested in 3D printing, who are interested in carpentry, any of these kind of handy skills, using those things combined to make great new technology. Kind of basement engineers is a good way, or garage engineers. You guys say garage here. Garage. Engineers. I also have my personal podcast, Talk Nerdy, which I started maybe 3 years ago now. I interviewed Simon Singh yesterday. It was so much fun. I'm actually interviewing Susan Blackmore at 1 o'clock today. I hope you guys will come. That's a live show. And later today, I'll be interviewing Sally LePage. So those will be coming up, new episodes. I sometimes guest on Dogma Debate with David Smalley. Do you guys know that show? Has it traveled across the pond? A little bit, yeah. And then, of course, this is probably how you best know my work with these crazy guys. My new brothers. It's been so much fun. We'll get to it. It's kind of a badass picture, huh? They look really badass. I'm pointing down here because that's my monitor. It's actually behind me, which is kind of weird. Okay, see, I'm learning with slides. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background, kind of an introduction, mostly because I don't know how to give proper talks. So I think talking about, they say write what you know, I guess speak what you know. I don't have many pictures from when I was a child. This is one of them, and it's one that I really like. I grew up Mormon in Texas. It's weird. It's a weird experience. Born and raised to Mormon parents. They were actually both Roman Catholic. My father's Italian, Santa Maria. My mother's Puerto Rican. They converted together before I was born, and then raised me as a young proper Mormon. LDS, as they call it. Spent some time in Utah, never lived there. Not all Mormons are from Utah. I know that the missionaries have pretty much gone everywhere, right? And we have at the Missionary Training Center a lot of individuals that came over here to the UK. Is it common that you see with the thing and they're walking down or on their bicycles? They might be on their bicycles here. How many of you saw Book of Mormon? So you know everything you need to know. Yeah, it's a really good crash course. So I grew up Mormon. I was a really good kid at the beginning. My folks divorced when I was 6, which made things actually a bit easier for me as I started to find my way. I was a good student, always. Sort of interested in science when I was young. This is maybe I think a 7th grade science fair that we won a regional competition. There's a picture from the newspaper. But like many young girls, I was really afraid of math. I didn't think, maths. I didn't think I was very good at it. I avoided it like the plague. I took whatever courses were required of me, but especially, we'll get there, but when I started college, I was quite afraid and actually took a varied path before I came back to science. So I was a model student, a model child, a very good Mormon, and then this happened, and my parents were very disappointed. I actually left the church when I was 14 years old, which is young, especially when you're still living with your folks at home. I was having a lot of questions. I was struggling. This was long before I really discovered the scientific method, but I was starting to realize that the LDS faith is quite a new religion. There were a lot of unanswered questions for me. A lot of individuals didn't really want to answer my questions, and I went to my father, who is in many ways, really a thinking man. He's an engineer and an incredibly brilliant man. And I started to ask him these questions and talk to him, and I was met with a lot of resistance. He pushed back quite a bit. And eventually, I had that coming out experience, like many people do, where I thought, I cannot keep lying to myself. I can't keep pretending that this is my way. And I told him, not only do I think I need to leave the church, I don't think I believe in God. I'm not sure that I ever did. I think I was trying to be a very good daughter and please everybody and do what I thought that you wanted of me. And his response, as an empathetic, loving father would say, I have a moral obligation to God to force you to go to church until you're 18, as long as you live under my roof. And because that is who I was at the time, I said to him, I bet if we went to court, I'm a precocious young woman, I do quite well in school and I'm well-spoken, and if we went to court, I'm pretty sure I could argue for why maybe mom should have full custody. And he said, if that is your choice, that is the choice that I'll allow you to make. And I didn't talk to my father for many years after that. He withdrew his child support, and our relationship really crumbled. It was a big devastation to him, but in many ways, I think it was much more of a devastation to me. Many therapy sessions are spent on that. We won't waste much more time on it. I did leave the church. I found my atheist identity, and ultimately, after going to college to study vocal jazz performance, thought I was going to be a jazz singer because there's so much money in that. I did find science, and I studied psychology as an undergraduate with an emphasis, with a philosophy minor and an emphasis in neuropsychology. I got my master's degree in neurobiology. I studied cell culture and electrophysiology, like a monolayer, multi-electrode electrophysiology of mouse model systems. There were a lot of wires that I remember. And then ultimately, I started a PhD. I moved from Texas. I went to New York, and I started a PhD I was studying adult neurogenesis. So birds create new neurons throughout the lifespan, not just in certain areas like humans do. So they're a good model. These are zebra finches. I keep pointing to the wrong place. These are zebra finches. They're fuckers. They're very hard to work with. That's a zebra finch brain up on the wall above me. Those are their cells. That little guy didn't live long. But I got to learn a lot from them. But ultimately I left. And I decided to go into science communication. How many of you in the audience are PhD dropouts? Keep the room up a little bit. Yeah, those are my people right up front. For some people, they realize when they're working for a very long time in academia that bench science is not for them. They realize that slaving away at the wet lab, is not where they want to be, and that teaching is their joy. And so once I came to that conclusion, I made that decision, and I made the crazy move to LA. I started to work towards a career in science communication, and it wasn't always easy. The very first gig that I ever got was a full live hour on Larry King Live, and I almost shit myself. I remember walking into the green room, and they said, Dr. Santa Maria, and I said, I'm not a doctor, don't call me that. And they said, what book are you plugging? I was like, I didn't write a book, why am I here? But I suffered through it. It was a good experience. Then I did a pilot for HBO that never went anywhere. Also a good experience. There's a lot of learning experiences in my background. I guested on many shows before I ever got a show of my own. Do you guys know Chris Hardwick here? Is he crossed over a little bit? He does a show called At Midnight back in the States. He's a big nerd. He's like a nerd god. That's him being a nerd. And of course, many, many opportunities with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was a bit of a mentor to me when I first started, which was wonderful. Ultimately, I landed a gig as the senior science correspondent for the Huffington Post, or the Puff-Ho, where I worked to try and formulate or form an area where there could be good science on the site. Huffington Post historically suffered from being very pseudoscientific and having a lot of bad science on its pages. But it never had a science section proper. So started a science section, did a series there called Talk Nerdy to Me. And I don't remember what's next, so I will click this button, yes. And then I started landing real jobs, and it was really exciting. I did some shows for the Weather Channel. I started working on an online news network called the Young Turks. You guys might know them, maybe not. I landed Young Turks. I landed a really great gig for Al Jazeera America, which is now defunct, but at the time was wonderful. And you guys actually get to see this here. It's a show called Techno, and they simulcast it on Al Jazeera English. So I definitely recommend checking it out. Really fun show, very good science reporting, and had a lot of fun with them. And then I really landed a big break, which was a show that none of you have heard of called Take Part Live. This was a live daily show. It was kind of that first thing that actually paid me a real living wage. It was that thing that made me think, I've made it, I'm on television every day, and I'm fully official. I have a dressing room, and there was a makeup artist that did my makeup every day, and I had wardrobe stylists putting me in cool outfits, and I got to interview famous people, and it was amazing, and they really respected the science on the show, I think. This was my wonderful camera, this is my co-host Jacob behind me looking like a goober. My wonderful camera operator gave me this Lego scientist, and he mounted it on my camera, which was so sweet. So I always got to talk to her when I was looking at prompter. And so ostensibly everything was going really well, and I was really happy, but one thing that I didn't realize, I thought I had gotten past, when I moved into media, was that misogyny is not just in science. It's kind of pernicious, and it's kind of everywhere. And so I started working on the show, and there were brilliant people working on the show and incredible female producers and crew and staffers, but my executive producer, the boss and everybody else's boss, and by the way, the person in my ear, I don't know if you've noticed when you watch people on TV, a lot of times they'll be wearing an IFB, especially on live television, which is what I was doing. It's an in-ear device so that they can talk to you from the control room. Usually it's your executive producer who's in your ear calling the show. He was not a nice man. Really had deep problems with women, and they became pretty apparent to me early on in the process, and I started struggling heavily with my self-esteem. One thing that I haven't mentioned from the beginning, those of you who have followed my work may know that I am an outspoken advocate of erasing the stigma around mental health and mental illness. I'm very outspoken that I have dealt with major depressive disorder from the time I was quite young. I take citalopram, brand name Celexa in the United States. Every day I see a therapist once a week, and I prioritize my mental health above everything else. And this was a very dark year and a half for me because I was struggling a lot, and I was really starting to question whether I was good at what I did, whether it was worthwhile for me to do it, whether I was worthy of the position. There were just a lot of deep kind of cutting comments that would happen all the time. I was expected to dress a certain way and act a certain way, and if I didn't, I wasn't pretty enough and I wasn't smart enough, and I took a secondary role to my male co-host, and it really started to mess with me. Not a good year for me while I was struggling through that. But at the same time, I was quite lucky to go on multiple episodes of the Joe Rogan podcast, and he recommended to me that I start my own podcast. And I'll tell you that podcasting, like, saved my life. It really did. How many people in here have their own podcasts? A few of you, right? Yeah, a few of you. And how many people in here listen to podcasts? Yeah, most of you. One thing that podcasting really affords you as a content creator is the ability to be, it's really loud, no? Is that happening to me? Is the ability to be your own boss and to make your own decisions about things and to edit the way that you want to edit and to not have somebody else telling you how things should go, especially not some man telling you how you should act, how you should appear. I also love the audio medium because I work so much in front of the camera, so much in television. It's nice to be able to go on air, and when people have conversations about it after the fact, they're talking about the content. They're talking about what you said. They're not talking about, your boobs. So Talk Nerdy was huge for me. I really enjoyed it. It saved my life, yada, yada, yada. I love it. Then things started to really fall into place. I landed this gig on SoCal Connected. We're a partially investigative journalism, partially a social affairs thing in LA. Oftentimes in America, we say, as goes LA, as goes the rest of the country. Kind of we're on the bleeding edge of a lot of policy in Los Angeles, so it's really exciting to be able to cover that. I've also won some great awards. They gave me 2 Emmys, which is crazy. So it's weird, I know. So I started to get my head back on straight and take the reins of my career a little bit and see myself as a science communicator and somebody who is worthwhile. Last night, you guys remember when Grace...
Can't even finish a thesis on time.
Can we... It's really bad, guys. Audio up there, can you cut the other mic? We're getting 2 feeds. Thank you.
Did I say that? You say that? I think I might have said that.
It's Marsh. Can you cut Marsh's mic? Marsh, everyone can hear you. I'm so sorry.
Sort of thing. Well, you say that. I've been busy.
Oh, he doesn't know. Okay, all right. I'll just talk louder. How about that? Because I don't want to cut into anybody else's time. Thank you for that, by the way. And then I started landing really cool jobs. I did a Vice show called Invention Factory, and I got to come to London and scan all of London from the BT Tower using terrestrial lidar. How many of you have been up in the BT Tower? So cool, right? I felt very lucky having that experience. I did a really cool show that was simulcast here, so it did air here, actually in 60 countries, called Brain Surgery Live for National Geographic. And I think I know what's next. We'll see. And I got to start doing things that I really loved. Because I was making a living wage, and I was proud of my work. I was able to start doing things gratis that really mattered to me. So I think what's next is a campaign that I shot for the local Natural History Museum, which was a lot of fun. I was able to volunteer my time, and it's an institution that's very close to my heart. And I think they did an amazing job with it, so I was pretty proud of the campaign. I think that's what's next, so check it out. Yeah.
My name's Cara Santamaria. I'm a science communicator. I'm spending the day here at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County doing what I love.
Think about the last time you were poking around in your garden. You probably saw a common snail just like this one. But get this, in the San Gabriel Mountains,
Recently, a population of endangered chestnut snails was discovered. Now, it wasn't some famous snail scientist that discovered them. It was actually a citizen scientist named Cedric Lee. And he noted that they actually smell like chocolate. They really do.
So that's when I won my 3rd Emmy. Oh, we're ready. Sorry.
What's next?
That works for me. That works.
Oh, and then this happened. This was such a wonderful experience. I didn't know that they were going to ask me to join them. They actually had me on the show a couple of times as a guest rogue. Apparently it was an audition, which they didn't tell me that. And so when they called me and they asked me to join them, I was really flattered and really honored. And I must say that these are some of the most amazing people I've ever worked with. Probably Steve Novella is... He's hilarious. He's also brilliant and probably one of the hardest working people I've ever met in the skeptic movement, at least in the States. Absolutely incredible person. Jay, Bob, Evan are some of my best friends. I've not known them for that long, but I feel very close to them. I feel like I'm part of the family. And in many ways, they were my entree into the skeptical movement. Gosh, that's really distracting. Is everybody out there okay, though? We're making do? Okay, it's testing the coffee to see if it's working. So I'm very new to the skeptical movement. I'm not so much new to atheist conferences, things of that nature. I've been going for quite a few years. Definitely not new to the science community. And I do think there's a lot of crossover, obviously, between science and skepticism. There are some scientists who are absolutely not skeptics, and that breaks my heart, because I do think that fundamental to the scientific process, to understanding the scientific method, is a real grasp of the skeptical mindset. And I think it's really cool to see how many incredible scientists are skeptics, and vice versa. How many incredible skeptics, even though they may have never taken a formal science course, are just incredible scientific thinkers, more so than many of the people that I've come across in some of my labs in the past. Okay, so I want to talk about that shift into science communication, what it is, why it matters, and how some of you who actually endeavor to do science communication yourselves can maybe work on that a little bit. This is what's happening in my country right now. Not sure if you were aware. And people always talk about, like, how did it get that way? How did it get that way? How did it get to be so bad? And how did American television, the landscape of American television, get to be so bad, so kind of dumbed down? It's a process, and it's not something that happens passively. It's something that has happened actively over many, many years. I think that Donald Trump really is a figurehead for a lot of other kind of systemic problems that are taking place in our country, especially when it comes to the kind of anti-intellectual climate that is pervasive in many parts of the states. Science television in the US is very different than science television here. I think that most people in the room are pretty aware of what American TV is like. We don't have that many mandates from the government ensuring that we have good educational programming. We don't have, I think, a very strong journalistic force. We have incredible journalists doing a great independent reporting for many different outlets, but as a whole, journalistic outlets have really become weak and dismantled. We've lost our science desks across the board in many print and on-air publications, and this need to be fair and balanced, I think, is undermining quite a bit. But more so than that, there's a profit motive in journalism now in America. You know, used to be, when we had only a few networks, that the scripted television or the game shows would actually fund the news. So you would make the money from the advertisers that were attached to the entertainment television, and the news didn't have to worry about getting ratings. The news could be, and it would use the funding that came from other aspects of the network. There were also government mandates about what percentage of airtime needed to be educational. A lot of that was dismantled during the Reagan administration, and we've seen a gradual decline in I think, the real push to inform the public across American media, and that's detrimental to a lot of the basic thinking capabilities of society when what they're watching all the time on television, especially when what they're watching that is kind of under a veiled guise to inform, is actually driven by ratings. So this is a great comic. Do you guys know Jorge Cham does PhD comics? Have any of you read PhD comics? It's really brilliant. This is a great comic that he put out. It was actually in 2011. Things have changed a little bit, but so he's got what science programming really looks like on TV right now. So on the Science Channel, 27% is actually shows about science, which is good. This is one of our better networks. We've got lots of shows with the words killer, bigger, or monster in it. Things that they say are about science but are actually about engineering. Shows that involve projectiles is big. Over here on Discovery has really shit the bed lately. We do debunk some myths on Discovery, which is good. Lots of shows about junk, shows with the words wild or dirty in them. Ooh, 20% shows about guns. Yay, America. Shows about Alaska. Everybody's obsessed with Alaska. Nat Geo, which actually I think is one of the last bastions, and especially Nat Geo Wild, which is an offshoot. They do a little bit of a better job. 50% shows, oh, sorry, nope, that's over here. 42% shows about state troopers and or guns. Some dinosaurs, shows about grown men doing stupid things. That's very common. And then History Channel, shows about junk, bikers, shows about a deadly profession that takes place on a boat and or truck. We love those shows. This is science programming in America. Animal Planet did a documentary about whether or not mermaids are real. It was awesome. I remember pitching a show once, a dinosaur show with a production company. Usually the way it works is that a production company will develop a concept, put together a sizzle or a pilot, and then sell it to a network. And so I was working with a production company on a dinosaur show, and we were talking about doing different vignettes about discoveries and about what we now know, because so much has changed in paleontology just in the last decade. We're using CT scanning. We can, try and find DNA evidence in certain areas, not with dinosaurs, but with some kind of ancient creatures. And we're learning a lot. It's high-tech science in what we think of as an old kind of geologic time scale. And so I was talking about this dinosaur show, and I remember the woman was like, okay, so I think Discovery is a good outlet. So we've got this thing about how did they have sex, and this thing about how did they sound, and what did they really look like. And then I think they're going to want to do, would you be opposed to kind of an episode like, are they still alive in the Amazon? And I was like, what is happening? But this is what we're up against all the time when we try to do science programming. It's super depressing. We've got Ancient Aliens. People love that. Shark Week, they came under a lot of fire. I was actually proud of the media for pushing back on this. Shark Week did a documentary about Megalodon, which is very much extinct, still being alive. And this is what really bothers me, because when you present pseudoscience and bullshit as fact, you end up with these kinds of audience polls. Do you believe that Megalodon is still alive? Yes, the evidence for Megalodon can't be faked, or I don't know what the last word is there. No, the scientists are right. Megalodon is extinct. 29% after watching that documentary. A lot of scientists got duped, too, when they went to film for these documentaries, because it was under the auspices of Discovery. They wanted to be able to talk about their scientific work, and they were taken out of context and cut up to say, that they were saying different things. It's gotten really bleak. It's gotten really dark. So my friend Joe Hansen, who does an online series called It's Okay to Be Smart for PBS Digital Channel, made this for one of his shows, because that's really, I think, what a lot of us feel like when we watch science programming now. And it's frustrating as a viewer. It's very frustrating as a content creator. So what caused this? Why is this happening? Well, I think one thing is that there is a culture of anti-intellectualism in the United States that's celebrated. I think that you see it when you watch the presidential debates, not just this go around, but if you think back to 4 years ago, kind of this, everybody shouldn't have to go to college. College is for the elite, and colleges are liberal places, and the media is a liberal place. And if we want to maintain conservative values and we want to be salt of the earth people, it's not about education, which is a dangerous precedent to set. You can be conservative in your values, and you can be a blue-collar worker and still value education and knowledge. And I think that we have to get back to a mentality which used to exist in the United States, where we do value intellectualism. I think that we have to see more representation of women and people of color in STEM fields. It's very difficult to imagine that you can be in a STEM field if you don't see anybody that looks like you in a STEM field. You guys use the acronym STEM here? You do, okay. Science, technology, engineering, and math, for those of you who don't know. Sometimes they'll use STEAM, they add art. I like the idea. I do think it's important, that we keep art in our academics. I don't like to use the acronym because I think it skews the data, especially when we're talking about the leaky pipeline and we're talking about underrepresentation. When you put art in there, everything gets complicated because it's a different track. Women and people of color in media, there just aren't enough. Do you guys know about the Bechdel test? Have you heard of that? Okay. Yeah, not many things pass it. And it's a huge bummer. And I urge you, when you're watching programming, ask yourself, is there a woman in this? Is she talking to another woman about something that's not a man? If there's no female characters in the program you're watching that talk to other female characters about things that aren't men, don't watch that show. Don't watch that film, because we don't want to encourage that this kind of behavior continues when the people at the very top who are making these kinds of decisions are mostly white men. I think we have to start to value truth, or at least an attempt to get at truth, over ratings. That is a systemic problem that's much harder for the audience to change. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have a cynical view where they say, oh, but the reason it's going the way of the Kardashians is because that's what people want, and we're only giving the people what they want. But the truth of the matter is, I remember talking to an influential television producer that was influential decades ago, and he had a kind of quote, I'm totally bastardizing it, something about, if you feed them steak, they'll eat steak. If you feed them, hamburger, they'll eat hamburger. And the truth is, it's what they want because it's what they keep being given. And you have this negative feedback loop that's occurring. That's really what I'm talking about. See, this is why I suck at slides. That's really what I'm talking about when I talk about mass appeal, right? I think sometimes we think that trying to make programming that's entertaining for the masses, we accidentally make programming that's entertaining for the lowest common denominator, and that's not a good approach to putting together programming. And I know that some of you sitting in the audience are like, this doesn't apply to me because I don't live in the States, but our stuff is just bleeding into your entertainment right now, and you have to fight back like we haven't. So how do we change that? I talked a little bit about role modeling. It's so important to see people in positions of power and authority that look like you. Whether that's a woman, somebody who's LGBTQ, somebody who's a person of color, somebody who struggles with mental illness. We've got to see individuals both in positions in front of the camera, but also in positions of power. We've got to fight back. We have to do things like boycott shows that we don't think should be on the air. We have to talk about it on social media and hold people accountable. Creating DIY content. I know so many people in this audience get that and appreciate that and do it themselves. It's a really great way that we've been able to see the democratization of content. It's getting cheaper to produce it. We have so many great platforms to put it out. Doesn't help if people are creating it if they can't put food in their mouth. So if you see great content that you really like, I urge you to support it. It's so important because it's very difficult to make a living wage when you're doing this yourself. It's a totally different animal than when you're working for a large production. I've been on both sides of that coin, and I'll tell you, it's it's a labor of love for many people. And so being able to support them, I think, just shows them that they're doing something that matters to you. And lastly, we do need to demand change. We can't be silent about that. All right. So when it comes to science communication, just going to get some water here. I wanted to list kind of my top 5. How am I doing? I'm doing good. I wanted to list my top 5 kind of tricks that I've learned over the years that hopefully you can take with you. The number one thing, anytime I teach a class about science communication or a workshop and people ask, what's the most important thing to know when you're starting as a science communicator? It's you have to know your audience. You have to take the time to know who you're talking to so that you know how to talk to them. Are you doing a children's television show? Are you doing a podcast interview for adults with an explicit rating? Are you going on a science show that's for a technical, scientific audience? Or are you going on a popular show? It's very important to know your audience so that you can tailor your content to them. This is almost as important. Never underestimate the intelligence of your audience. Don't do it. We do it all the time, and it's the biggest mistake we make. But always underestimate their vocabulary because they don't speak the same language as you do. And that's not just a high and mighty thing that scientists say. Like, I don't know anything about plumbing. And if you start using plumbing terms around me, I might be very confused because it's a specialized dictionary that I am not privy to. And there's always ways to explain scientific principles without having to use a lot of jargon. It takes more words, you have to circumlocute, but you will get to the same place. And one of the best ways to do that is through use of analogy. We all know this. It's not about what to think, it's about how to think. The undercurrent of everything we do in science communication, whether that's podcasting, television, writing, whatever, speaking at conferences like this, the undercurrent needs to be about just learning how to think and reiterating what it means to think critically and to be able to problem solve. It's not about knowing facts. I have a terrible memory. I don't know many facts, but I can look them up. And that's really what matters. It's important to always be yourself. This is something that Grace was talking about last night. She was talking about imposter syndrome, and I think it really hit home for me. I think it probably did for a lot of you in the audience too. Sometimes we struggle, especially when we're on a stage or we're expected to get up in front of a group of people, and we start to worry about, how do I be the person that I should be? Or we look at our role models, or the people that we really look up to, and we say, how can I change the aspects of my personality that I don't like so I can be more like that person that everybody seems to really like? I struggle with this a lot. I'm not a comedian. I don't go up here and tell jokes. It's not what I do. It's not the way that I give talks. And of course, in the back of your mind, if I were funnier, I would be able to pull a bigger audience, or it's not who I am. And I think it's really important that even though, I don't expect you, I don't know who the hell I am. That's like a lifelong journey. But to try to be true to yourself and embrace the imposter syndrome and embrace those weird quirks. You might have a weird speech quirk. You might have a funny way that you say things. And you don't realize, especially if any of you end up working in television or in radio, sometimes that's why you get booked, is that thing that you hate about yourself, other people really find endearing about you. And then you find yourself whitewashing yourself and trying not to be that way. And it has the exact opposite effect. People will stop wanting to work with you because you don't seem like yourself anymore. And lastly, you have to meet people where they are. This kind of goes back to knowing your audience. Nobody wants to be talked down to. Nobody wants to be made fun of. I think we in the skeptic community do the worst, are the worst perpetrators of this. And we have to be better about not being snobs, about not being arrogant, about not being pedantic, especially when we're talking to people who don't have similar beliefs, who have a lot of baggage, who are coming from a very different place culturally, religiously, whatever. I heard this funny story. I did a panel about science communication at Dragon Con in Atlanta a few weeks ago, and one of the individuals there was talking about climate change and doing climate change education in a church setting. And they were talking about one of the little weird things that they would do is they would take their graphs, and instead of making their graphs start at the age that the Earth actually started, they would start them at 10,000 years. And it had nothing to do with the argument about climate change, but it gave a comfort level to the audience so that they didn't immediately discount everything they said and stop listening. And so sometimes there are these kind of brilliant little psychological tricks that we can do to help get under the skin of somebody who might immediately stop listening to you because you come from a place that they don't understand, and or vice versa. So just be cognizant of that. Bonus, stop trying to sound so goddamn smart. Nobody wants to listen to that. It's not, think about all of your favorite science communicators. You know, think about Carl Sagan, think about Brian Cox, think about Neil deGrasse Tyson, and a lot of the people who have really meant something to you over the course of your lives. They're not pedantic. The reason that they're effective is because they speak the language of people, because they are people. And all of you and every professor out there has that in them. My job sometimes as a journalist is to pull that out, and it can be very frustrating. It's easier when you think about it from the jump. All right, so before we go to Q&A, because I like that part and I want to spend more time on it, because I don't like talking at people. I'm used to interviewing people. I'm not used to being the person on the spot, and I think it's much more interesting when it becomes interactive. Before we jump into that, I wanted to talk about some of the efforts that I have moving forward. Some friends of mine and I, two friends, Jason Goldman and Sarah Curtis and I, developed something that we call SciComm Camp. We were bemoaning the loss of an earlier get-together that is now defunct, and we were realizing that there's not a lot of places for science communicators and people who are interested in kind of honing that craft to get together and learn from one another. So, you know, like you do, we were like, why don't we throw one? Oh my God. And it's a lot of work, but it was really exciting. We did it for the first time last year. It was maybe 50 people at a small campground where we stayed all weekend, and we had some incredible programming. I'm feeding a cardboard cutout of a cougar a beer in that picture. He's our local hero, P22. He's a mountain lion that lives in Griffith Park, a park near my house, and he's all alone, cut off by freeways. He has an incredible story if you're interested in looking it up. By the way, a cougar and a puma and a mountain lion are all the same thing, if you didn't know that. Another thing, and sorry, we've moved on now to year 2, and we get to do our next year next month at camp, and we've doubled in size, and we're really excited to see SciComm Camp grow and to see all of the exciting young science communicators who are getting their start. Another endeavor that I have at home is something that we call the Nerd Brigade. It's literally just my friend group, and we branded ourselves, which is, I guess, what you do when you live in LA. They're all incredible people who are brilliant and beautiful. Here's a photo of a few of us, and we do fun science things. Most of my friends are PhDs from Caltech, USC, UCLA. Some of them aren't formally educated, but all of them are science enthusiasts who either work in television, have blogs, have podcasts, write science books. And so we do fun events together. Here we're at the 60-inch telescope at Mount Wilson, which is just above Caltech. Hubble's locker was in the basement, you guys. It's freaking crazy. If you ever get out to LA, I definitely recommend that you go to Mount Wilson and you can see cool shit. We also host some events at the Natural History Museum, the local Natural History Museum. I also recommend, if and when you come to LA, that you visit there because it's a wonderful institution. And that's us doing science soiree, or what do I call it, science salon, at the Natural History Museum. And then lastly, we do pub nights as well, science pub nights. A little different than Skeptics at the pub, but not really. And yeah, so this is my introduction to you. The next time I'm at QED, we'll see if that happens. We'll see if I'm invited back. I hope to get deeper into some other things, but I really wanted to make sure that we all got to know each other. We have a whole other day. I am very grateful for being first because I can't wait to talk to as many of you as I can throughout the day and meet so many new friends because, of course, this is very new to me, and I feel very welcome. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for welcoming me into your community, and now if anybody has any questions, I would love to move over to that. Thanks.
Do you think the increasing ability of people being able to pick and choose what they want to watch via the likes of YouTube and Netflix makes science communication and outreach easier or harder?
I think that it makes outreach easier, meaning that if you are an individual who wants to do science communication, you have a platform that you never had before. I think that it makes curation and selection much more difficult, and that's where trust comes in, right? It comes to finding individuals and outlets that you do really trust. I'm honored to be close to a lot of really incredible science communicators, so I feel like I'm very lucky that I just happen to know a lot of the people who do the best of the best in science communication, and I get to learn from them every day. And they have been, they've been really important to help me understand who to trust and who not to trust, going across the board and trying to find good programming and good content. But absolutely, I think it's definitely two sides of that coin. But for those who are interested in doing science communication, I think that the sky's the limit now. Guys, don't leave me hanging. There's still like 7 minutes. What's up?
Hi, I'm a computer scientist, and we have a bit of the same problem as in science communication. Too few women and people of color and everything. But like, I'm a white man, so what can we do about this? What can we help?
I think that's a great question, and I think that it's one that's not asked enough. I think it's really important that we as women or as people of color have allies in these areas. I think it's really important that white men be feminists and understand some of the undercurrents that women face. A lot of times when we think about implicit bias or we think about different other kinds of psychological biases that we deal with, and we think about that all the time as skeptics. We know that the worst perpetrators are often ourselves. We know that sexism and racism is not just perpetrated by other, but that some of the same biases come out in women and in people of color. And so it is really important that wherever we go, we feel like we have allies and we feel like we have individuals who are thinking about these things always. That said, it's also important to know the concepts of mansplaining and bropropriation. And to understand that being an ally doesn't mean talking over a woman and making sure that her voice is heard by being louder than her so that you can help her voice be heard. It's about sometimes speaking up when maybe she's not being listened to. It's about backing her up on things. It's about maybe repeating what she says in a boardroom when other people aren't listening. But it's also about doing things or not doing things that often we do without noticing, like taking somebody's idea or taking credit for the work that somebody's done, and just ensuring that credit happens where credit's due, because that doesn't always occur.
You mentioned that lots of the science journalists has disappeared from desks. What has happened to these people? Do you know that? It ought to be a huge resource of people that know the scientific method and science communication, but have disappeared somewhere.
Right. So I think I want to answer that twofold, because I do think it's important, and it's not something I really mentioned in the talk today, but it's something I sometimes focus on, that there is a big difference between science communication and science journalism. Journalists and science communicators, I think both feel an obligation to the public to try and find truth, to try and get the facts straight, and to try and provide evidence for assertions that are made. Journalists are not advocates of science. Journalists are there to get to the bottom of what is happening and to report it as it is. Science communicators are often cheerleaders or evangelizers for science, and because of that, sometimes there are conflicts. That said, I think that science communicators can be incredible journalists and vice versa, and it depends on what your gig is, your job, it depends on who you're working for. And you're right, a lot of science desks have closed, meaning that there are a lot of specialized science journalists that are out of work, but there are also, I think, there's less of a push for people to go into these fields to begin with because they don't see a lot of prospects, which is really sad. But you do see this mass exodus of individuals from bench work, from laboratory science, who have worked an entire career in academia, who have decided, I don't want to do this anymore, and I would love to go into journalism. Simon Singh is a good example of that. You know, he's an incredible. Are you here today? I don't know. But he's an incredible physicist who then moved over into journalism. The problem is the jobs aren't there. And so I do think we have this incredible resources and this incredible pool of talent, but it's not helpful if there's no funding. And it's not helpful if they're not getting paid to do what they do so well. And we know that publishing is struggling, we know that print is struggling, and it's harder to get a living wage when this is what you do, which is why sometimes we do have to be creative. And I just think it's another reason that we have to support DIY content whenever we can, especially if it's something that we find to be trustworthy.
Hi, I suppose I'm interested in getting your opinion on where you see the role of industry in science outreach and communication. We do, you know, you put out there for hiring and recruitment, and that's the basic things, but are there any sort of quick wins or small things that industry could do to help people like yourself, maybe not the best science communicators that we are, but what little things would you like to see?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think that that's one of the core missions of this friend group that I have, Nerd Brigade. We've been talking about incorporating and starting to do something more in a more official capacity. And one of the things that we often talk about is working as kind of liaisons between academia, media, and industry, because these are three really siloed areas where there's a lot of talent, and we could all really help each other, and there are career opportunities available for individuals within all three. And so I do think that we need to be doing a better job as science communicators to reach kind of across the aisle into these areas that we're less comfortable with. For example, Los Angeles is Hollywood. Most people that live in Los Angeles are somehow allied to the entertainment industry, whereas San Francisco and Silicon Valley are much more kind of tech startup. We're starting to finally see a lot of crossover between those two areas, and it's only kind of been synergistic since they've collided, because there's a lot that we can learn from one another, but there's also a lot that we have to offer one another. And I think it's a great opportunity for young science communicators when they see careers that are available, especially freelancers, right? We have to make our own way. I don't have a company I work for. I have my own company. So I'm working to work, and I'm always finding a new job because it's feast and famine. And I have a lot of friends who have gotten really great jobs working for industries. There's like a marijuana firm that's doing these new CBD pills because it's been decriminalized in a lot of places, and especially in California. So I have a friend who's working because she did cannabinoid research in her PhD, and so now she's working as a consultant for this kind of like sales company. You know, we want to sell weed, but she's like, okay, let's talk about the science of that, and let's make sure we get it right. And it's a really cool partnership that they've been able to form, and I'm starting to see that more and more, but I would like to see it across the board.
We have time for one question.
Ooh, one more question. Good
Hi.
timing. Hi.
Have you any ideas why even at conferences like this there are so few women asking questions at the Q&A?
I love it. That was such a high note. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you.
Cara Santa Maria, ladies and gentlemen.